We're ready.
Chair, no changes to the agenda.
Go ahead.
Oh, Chair, you need a motion and a second for approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Roll call vote?
Marquez,
Yes.
Dozier,
Yes.
Loaiza,
Yes.
and Atkinson.
Yes. Sorry, I didn't hear.
That's all right.
Now we're ready.
Chair, just a friendly reminder, you have public comment section.
We want to have public comments before we do anything?
Yes.
Oh. Are there any public comments? Speak now. Moving on. Okay.
Chair, members of the committee, if you're ready, we'll start with the one item on the agenda, and that is we're going to complete the review of the charter. I think we have like 3 remaining sections, which our city clerk, Yasmina, will take lead on. And then time should allow for us to bring back, we have 3 items that so far you've asked for us to do some research to bring back to you. One is the 120-day under the city manager section from 120 days, 180 days related to elections. And then the second item is related to the city attorney, and there was discussion to bring that back. And then the third item was related to finance sections 7.09 and 7.10. That we need some clarification on those, but that's open for discussion, those 3 items. And so we'd like to begin with the first portion of it, and that is to complete the review of the charter. And with that, we'll have our city clerk begin that process.
Good evening, committee. We are going to start first with Article 9, and that's general provisions. I've provided the matrix to you all in our last previous meeting. So in the city of Shafter, I've provided our conflicts of interest of what is stated in our charter. And it states that the use of public office or employment for private gain is prohibited. Appearances or statements made to city officials on behalf of private interests in violation of state law. Any conflict of interest of formal council member or employee being compensated in any way for attempting to influence any action of the council or city for 2 years after the end of service of the councilor with the city. And then there's definitions of lapse of ethics in the dealings of the city officers and employees with each other, the public, businesses, and other governmental agencies and jurisdictions. And we also state violations of conflict of interest regulations of any person convicted of a violation of this section shall be ineligible for a period of 5 years following such conviction to hold any city office or employment. If an officer or employee of the city is convicted of a violation of this section, he or she shall be deemed to have automatically forfeited his or her office or position. So that's what our Shafter charter states. Anaheim's, Hayward's, Irvine, Lancaster, Palmdale, Riverside, Santa Rosa, San Bernardino, Visalia, and Tulare did not state any conflict of interest in their charter itself. So are there any questions on that? We can move towards the franchises. Okay, so in the Shafter charter franchises, it states that the city can grant a franchise to any person, partnership, corporation, or other legal entity capable of exercising the privilege conferred, whether operating under an existing franchise. And the process would be a franchise ordinance, the procedure, franchise term, acquisition, franchise conditions, resolution of intent, and franchise adoption. And that's just a summary. There's more obviously in the charter, and that was section 9.02. If anything, if you all would like further information. Anaheim's charter states that any person, firm, or corporation furnishing the city or its inhabitants with transportation, communication, terminal facilities, water, light, heat, etc., or any other public utility or service, or using the public streets, ways, alleys, and for franchise procedures, refer to their section in their charter. I believe someone's getting in the meeting. Hayward state that they are empowered to grant by ordinance a franchise to any person, firm, or corporation, similar to ours, and for its inhabitants with transportation, communication, terminal facilities. So that's similar to Anaheim's, and their franchise procedures are referred there. Irvine states that they may grant franchise. I believe these are all very similar. Person, partnership, corporation, or other legal entity capable of exercising the privilege conferred, whether operating under an existing franchise or not, and may prescribe the terms, conditions, and limitations of such grant, including the compensation to be paid to the city therefore. So for the procedures, we can refer to their section in the charter. Lancaster states that they shall have the power to adopt by ordinance providing for the acquisition, development, or operation by the city of any public entity, or any ordinance providing for the granting of a franchise to any public utility not owned by the city, which proposes to use or is using city streets, highways, or other rights of way.
On these franchises, does the city have quite a few of them, or have one with the cable company or something?
We have one with the refuse haulers. Or
Okay.
garbage pickup. So those are the only ones that we have. We get franchise from utilities, but that's per state. So the state governs, how much we get from utilities, like cable, for example. But the ones the city controls, and the only one we have is for refuse.
So on the cable TV, they pay a fee to the city,
It's collected by the state, and then we get a certain.
then you get
amount.
some back.
Yeah.
Is there anything where you can have more than one? Because in our community, Spectrum doesn't have a good soccer package. Dish has the superb soccer. So half the town is on Dish, and the city's not receiving any revenue for that because it's all about the soccer.
Okay. That's something for us. I'll have our finance director look into, see the breakdown of what we get. But yeah, so.
I mean, our demographics are different now.
Right.
Baseball's still important, but soccer's way bigger.
Right.
Thank you.
So I think what you'll find in looking at the matrix committee members is that they all pretty much have the same language similar to ours. There's not a pretty major significant change that we can find in our research. So unless you as a committee want to dive into this section of the franchise clause of the charter, we can. Otherwise, like I said, you're going to find that, like we did in the research, that they're all
Pretty
much the
uniform.
same. Yeah, exactly.
Any comments on that? Hearing none, let's move on.
Okay. Last section. Excuse me.
So moving on to violations, in Chapter's charter, it states that a willful violation of any provision of this charter shall constitute a misdemeanor unless by ordinance it is made an infraction. Maximum fine or penalty for a misdemeanor or infraction shall be as established by the state law unless a contrary intention is expressed in the ordinance. So we have enforcement, charter compliance, and violation of the charter. More detail, if you'd like, it's on section, 9.03. So we see Anaheim's violations in their charter. shall be a misdemeanor and shall be punishable upon conviction by a fine or imprisonment or both, not exceeding the maximum fine or term of imprisonment. Hayward states that a violation of any provision of this charter shall be deemed a misdemeanor and punishable upon conviction by a fine not exceeding $500 or by imprisonment for a term not exceeding 6 months, or by both such fine and imprisonment. Irvine states that they shall constitute a misdemeanor and may be prosecuted in the name of the people of the state of California and may be redressed by civil action filed by the city. The maximum fine or penalty for any violation of a city ordinance shall be the same as established by the general laws for a misdemeanor. Lancaster, at Palmdale, Santa Rosa, San Bernardino, and Tulare do not state violations of their charter. But Riverside does state that a violation of any provision of the charter shall be deemed a misdemeanor and be punishable upon conviction by a fine of not exceeding $1,000 or by imprisonment for a period not exceeding 6 months. And Visalia states that shall be deemed a misdemeanor and be prosecuted by the authorities of the city in the name of the people and may be redressed by civil action at the option of said authorities.
I have a question. This on section C violation of the charter, it's talking about council members, but does this also apply to anyone involved with any of the decisions for the city or specifically just for the council members?
Good question. The committee member Marquez, or our city attorney, Mr. Steele, respond. Henry?
Good evening, Commissioner. No, that would apply to everyone. So the charter applies to everyone in the city, not just the city council members.
Okay, would it be beneficial to maybe word that differently to include everyone or encompass everyone?
We could. That could be a recommendation that you could make to the council.
Just this is committee member Marquez, just perusing the other cities, like city of Anaheim, theirs doesn't specify. It basically contains the same language, just any violation provision of the charter should be a misdemeanor, but it doesn't specify which individuals. So I think it's understood that anybody that's a city official that violates it is deemed to be in violation and therefore is punishable and is considered a misdemeanor.
So maybe taking out council members so that it doesn't, just, I'm trying to think of the word where it's just focused on one person or one category of people. That would also encompass everyone.
Tim? So, Chair, that's to you to see if the committee wants to bring that back or have further discussion as a possible item to bring it before council.
Well, the council's the only people that are elected. Everybody else is an employee.
Correct. And we have rules and personnel rules and regulations that we violate city
That
policy.
cover all that.
Covers all that. And then so you're correct. The elected officials are the ones that more or less would be governed by this.
Any other comments on it?
So if it technically only pertains to elected officials, then maybe that's what the wording needs to be. Then
If it helps, we could have our city attorney's office do a little bit more research from the legal perspective on this to see if back in the 90s when this was derived, like what was, were there different rules? As you know, state legislature is always passing new laws. Like we never had AB 1234, the conflict of interest training and the requirement. Those are all new. So it could be that in the last 20 plus years, things have changed that may require some modification. So
so concern would be just, we're specifically saying council members, but let's say that you're saying anyone that has anything to do with the city, this pertains to them. Is if you're saying it's stated somewhere else in like maybe their contract or in their documentation, but anyone could argue that doesn't apply to me, that only applies to council members. As it's written
So,
harder.
Commissioner, this is Henry again. So to clarify, I believe the section that you're talking about violation, it would be section 9.03C.
Yes,
That does apply specifically to council members.
okay,
But the section 9.03, the introduction paragraph, that would be applicable to everyone.
Okay.
And also, as Gabriel stated, there are specific state laws that govern elected officials, ethics, as he stated, AB 1234 and government section 1090.
so section 903 encompasses everyone, but C specifics is specifically just for council members.
Correct.
Okay, and you've never had any issues in this area regarding anyone kind of using this to their advantage or disadvantage or anything like that? Everything's been kosher?
I think Gabriel could talk a little bit about that. I in my experience, I haven't.
Okay.
Yeah, so to follow up to that, I'm looking to the mayor in our audience. She's been the longest serving council member and was here during the formation. And she's saying that we've not had any issues with this. So to answer your question, there have not been any violations that resulted in a council member being found in violation of the charter, resulting in a misdemeanor. So since 1994, when it was adopted, there have been 0 violations.
Okay, perfect. No, I think it's fine.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know.
Okay, yes, Mina.
Okay, so moving on to charter amendment. In our charter, it states the amendments to the charter shall be approved by a majority of the voters of the city at a regular election as set by state law. And an amendment to this charter may be framed and proposed in any manner provided by law, by an ordinance of the council containing the full text. A report with specific full text is prepared by an elected charter commission and created pursuant to state law. An initiative by the voters of the city, or a majority of the registered voters of the city voting upon a proposed charter amendment vote in favor of it. The amendment shall become effective at the time fixed in the amendment. So Anaheim's charter states that charter and any of its provisions may be amended by a majority vote of the electors voting on the question. An amendment, revision, or repeal may be proposed by initiative or by the governing body. Hayward states that their charter or the application thereof to any person or circumstance is held invalid. The remainder of the charter and the application of such provision to other persons or circumstances shall not be affected. And Irvine's and San Bernardino, Visalia, and Tulare charter does not state charter amendments. Lancaster states that it may be amended by a majority vote of the electors voting on the question. Amendment, revision, or repeal may be proposed by initiative or by the governing body. Palmdale states that the charter and its provisions may be amended by a majority vote. Amendment, revision, or repeal may be proposed by initiative or the governing body. However, that any such amendment or repeal proposed by the governing body must be voted on at an election held in November. And unless the proposed measure is approved by at least 4 members of the city council at a regularly meeting, in which case the measure may be voted on at a special or any other municipal election. Riverside's charter states that it may be amended in accordance with the Constitution and the laws of the state of California. And Santa Rosa states that it shall be reviewed in the year 2002 and not less than every 10 years thereafter by a committee appointed by the council. And I believe that's it for charter amendment.
Any comments on that area? let's keep rolling along.
Okay, so chapters decennial review in the charter states that within 60 days of reporting of the official results of the census to the city, for each decennial census of the population, the council will create a citizens charter advisory committee, not within more than 6 months, shall review the city charter and make any recommendations to the council regarding any revisions which it may feel be beneficial to the city. Anaheim, Hayward, Irvine, Lancaster, Palmdale, San Bernardino, Visalia, and Tulare do not state a decennial review in their charter. But Riverside states that in February of 2019 and in February every 8 years thereafter, the city council shall appoint and appropriate adequate funds for a charter review committee. And Santa Rosa's is the same as their charter amendment. And not less than every 10 years thereafter by a committee to be appointed by the council in accordance with their section and existing council policies on the appointment of boards, commissions, and committees.
Anything else?
We have 3 more areas. but any
Yeah.
discussion?
Go ahead.
So if there's no questions there, we'll move on to the last section, Article 11, which is the first section is transition. And it states that all city ordinances for the city of Shafter, ordinances, resolutions, orders and regulations, which are enforced with when this charter becomes effective shall remain in effect until repealed, except to the extent that they are inconsistent with, disagree in any respect with, or interfere with the effective operation of this charter or of ordinances adopted pursuant hereto. Then it states severability of provisions of, if any provision of this charter is held to be invalid, the other provisions of the charter shall not be affected thereby. The application of the charter or any of its provisions to any person or circumstance is held invalid. The application of the charter and its provisions or circumstances shall not be affected. So Anaheim, Irvine, Lancaster, Palmdale, Santa Rosa, San Bernardino, Visalia, and Tulare do not state transition / severability provision in their charter. Hayward's does state that any provision of this charter is held invalid, the remainder of the charter and the application of such provision or other persons or circumstances shall not be affected. And Riverside states that any provision of this charter or application is held invalid, the remainder of the charter and the application of such provision to other persons or circumstances shall not be affected. Okay, so moving on to current elected officers transition. It's chapters charter states at the time of the adoption of the charter, council members serving shall serve until the end of the term for which they have been elected and until their successors have been elected and qualified. Anaheim, Irvine, Lancaster, Palmdale, San Bernardino, Visalia, and Tulare do not state any such transitions in their charters. Hayward's does state that they shall adopt an ordinance providing for a modification of the terms of council members to assure the smooth transition of office. Riverside states that they shall continue to perform the duties of their respective offices and employments without interruption and for the same compensation and under the same conditions until the appointment or election and qualification of their successors, but subject to the provisions of the charter. And Santa Rosa states that the present officers and employees shall without interruption continue to perform the duties of their respective offices and employments for the compensation provided by the preceding charter or existing ordinances, resolutions, regulations, or laws. So moving on, the continuity of laws. It states that we continue to own, possess, and control all rights and property of every kind and nature owned, possessed, or controlled by it on the effective date of this charter and shall be subject to all its debts, obligations, and liabilities. And it also states continuation of acts, all lawful ordinances, resolutions, and rules and regulations enforced on this effective date of this charter and not in conflict of or inconsistent herewith are continued in force until repealed or amended. And a continuation of officers and employees. All officers and employees of the city as of the date of this charter is approved and adopted shall retain their respective offices and employment subject only to provisions of this charter applicable employment policies. So Hayward, Irvine, Lancaster, Palmdale, Santa Rosa, San Bernardino, Visalia, and Tulare do not state this in their charter, but Anaheim states that all lawful ordinances, resolutions, rules, and regulations enforced on the effective date of this charter are not in conflict or inconsistent herewith shall continue in force until duly repealed, amended, changed, or superseded. And Riverside states that all lawful comprehensive codes, ordinances, resolutions, rules, and regulations enforced at the time of this charter takes effect and not in conflict or inconsistent herewith are hereby continued in force until the same shall have been duly repealed, amended, changed, or superseded by proper authority. And that concludes the comparisons.
Cool. Any questions or comments on that?
Okay, members of the committee, we do have a brief PowerPoint that's bring back the items that you had requested for further discussion. And so we're going to queue that up at this time. And we'll start, I believe it's with the section 5, the city manager.
I believe Henry, are you still on the call?
Yeah, I can start for now.
Okay.
I don't have the clicker.
I'm back. Hey, Gabriel, I'm back. I don't know
Okay,
why, but it
Henry.
like kicked me off.
Oh, that's all right. We're just going to go ahead and start that. I'm going to start this section real quick, Henry.
Okay, sounds good.
So this is the existing language in the section 5.02 related to restrictions or on dismissal of the city manager after a general election. Current language contains 120 days. And I think the committee was having discussion about possibly extend that out to 180 days. So next section, next slide, I think. So this is basically what that language would look like. Is basically just changing from 120 to 180 days. So if you go back to so this is just some follow-up discussion is consequences for violation of section 5.02. In other words, we're trying to reach out, and I'll see if Henry, to our personnel attorney. In the event, let's say the city council wanted to not wait the 120 or 180 days. A legal question is, well, what's the consequences, right? We just heard about the section, any violation, it's a misdemeanor, on and so forth, right? That's one. The other is this section of 5.02 applicable if the manager and the city council, through mutual agreement, decide to part ways through a separation agreement? So city manager and the council can have a sit down in closed session and agree that it's mutually beneficial. The city manager wants to leave, the city council would like to go in a different direction, and they both agree that a separation is best. Under that circumstance, under that scenario, there's a separation agreement. Basically, it's like a severance. It is a severance, right? And that separation agreement will contain the different clauses. It'll basically say, hey, city manager wishes to separate, whatever the case may be. So is that applicable, right? Is that an option that if it's mutual, does 5.02 really apply or not? And if it's within those 180 days, maybe the council or the manager can see the writing on the wall and they say, you know what, it's too late for me and my health or whatever the case may be, and best for the city. It's best they go into, I separate and we agree to it. what happens if it falls within those 180 days, right? Or is the city in violation of this? Or because it's mutual, it's not applicable, right? So I think there's some additional legal research that we're hoping to get from our personnel attorney under that scenario. Henry, I'm going to put you on the spot. I don't know if you were able to get in contact.
Yes, so I did. So the consequence for violation of section 5.02, there would be two. One would be that the action may be voided since the city council does not have the power to terminate the city manager within that window. The other one is that there would be potential litigation for unlawful termination. And the way to work around that section is that the city manager can always resign and come to some sort of agreement with the city through a separation agreement.
So in essence, litigation, you terminate, lawsuit, unlawful termination, on and so forth. The other is just, hey, let's part ways. Let's do a separation agreement, call it a day.
So if we do the separation agreement, then we don't need these extra days.
Right, because at the end of the day, I mean,
Another,
city manager is works at the will of the city council.
right.
Sure.
And I mean, and so it really, that means at the pleasure of the city council is like, well, the city council chooses to go in a different direction, right? And the city manager chooses to separate as well, then through a separation agreement, they can just agree to part ways. And
Yeah.
this section's not applicable because it's mutual.
So there's no need to go to 180 from the 120.
yeah.
Technically and legally, there isn't.
Okay.
Right.
And thanks for clarifying that. That was kind of my question. And really after now seeing the entire charter and these last few meetings and comparing it to other, charters that cities have, you guys have answered a lot of questions actually. So thanks. And I would now, knowing that, I'd recommend no change in that department, obviously. So, yeah, so great.
I would agree with that.
Is that the wishes of the committee? You got others on?
Yeah, anybody else on the committee have a comment about that?
I'm fine with keeping it the way it is, the 120.
Say that again.
I'm fine with keeping it the 120, not changing to 180.
Yeah, same here.
And then you had committee member Marquez.
Yeah.
Could we, for the record, get her to agree?
Good.
Committee member Marquez, if you can.
Yeah, you know what? I did have a question, but it just like totally skipped my mind. So can we maybe just come back to it in a few minutes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to remember. If not, we'll see.
Okay. The next section was related to the city attorney. And it's section 6.03, and currently the language states the office of the city attorney is hereby created. The city attorney shall be a department head and may be either full-time or part-time employee. And this is a word, or such services may be contracted to a law firm experienced in municipal law, right? So it gives the city the option of either having a full-time, part-time and attorney, which is then deemed a department head, or its legal services can be contracted to a law firm experienced in municipal law.
So what we've been having for the last decade or
Is a
so,
contract city attorney.
the contract city attorney,
Yes. And it's been BB and K for.
right? No, they're good.
Yeah. So I think the question was in the discussion, and the one committee member, Mrs. Harmer, is not present, was the scenario of what if the city attorney is a department head and is viewed, and they fall under the preview of the city manager, which then the city manager can have influence. I think that's what the discussion was about. Can have influence on the city attorney as to what information is shared, is not shared, legal advice, whatever the case may be, to the city council. That was part of the discussion by the committee. I provided another scenario, which is the opposite. When they work for the city council, the same scenario can fall in place. I've shared with you an article from the city of Fresno. It just recently came out in which that, city attorney was being influenced by the majority of the city council, and that city attorney ultimately left. So there's two sides of that scenario. I mean, it's not just because they're a department head and they work for the city manager that I think there's influence, but the opposite is true too. Then when they're direct appointee of the city council, I think it becomes more political. And I think the city of Fresno's recent example, kind of illustrates that. But we did have some discussion and just looked at other charters and what some possibilities. And if you change the slide, Yasmina, is keep the section as is. I mean, one thing is, if it's not broken, why change it? It's been working for the city for the longest, since the creation of the charter and it was voted. You can change it, but you can also put some safeguards in here that it can be a majority affirmative vote of the council to appoint, or it could be a super majority to remove the city attorney. So it could be a minority to appoint, but a super majority. For us here, a super majority is 4 or 5 votes. All right. A hybrid model could be that the city attorney is interviewed and the city manager looks to hire, recommends that city attorney, but the city council has to give its consent to appoint the city attorney. So city attorney leaves, we go to hire one, city manager goes through the process of recruiting, bringing forward the candidate. I present it to the city manager, presents it to the city council. The city council then has to approve that appointee that's being recommended by the city manager. That's a hybrid model, right? So we did some brainstorming, came up with some suggested options that you can consider. So this is up now to the committee to have your discussion on it.
Well, I was thinking about that at our last meeting, and you're the fourth city manager
Mhm.
that's here since the charter was adopted, and I don't think it's broken, so I don't know why we'd want to change it. And we did have an incident here a couple of years ago where the council got a little crazy and tried to terminate some people and hire somebody else that had no I don't see it here, but didn't have any municipal background. That was a disaster. I don't want that happening anymore. I'd prefer to have the way it is now, department head, and if they don't like who you hired, then the council can address the city manager.
So just to clarify, if you can go back 2 slides, Yasmina. Oops, one more. Yeah. Oh, the one you just missed. Now,
Yeah, law firm experience with municipal law.
right. So it's only a department head if it's a city employee. All right. So if it's a contract firm, because the key word here is or, such services may be provided by law firm experience. So technically it's a contract employee, right? So they're an independent contractor. So they're not even an employee of the city. When it's like right now, BB&K, they're an independent contractor. So legally per Fair Labor Standards Act, they're independent contractors. So they're not a department head to me right now. Okay. In the event the city elected to not contract its city attorney role and hire its own city attorney, like some cities have their own city attorney as an employee, then under that scenario, that employee would be a department head. And as one of my reports, like the chief of police, director of public works, whatever the case may be, under that scenario. But if it's contracted out, they're an independent law firm. They're not a department head.
And that's what we have right now
And that's what we've had
for a long time.
Forever. It's my understanding. Most cities cannot afford, well, they might be able to afford their in-house city attorney, but it's routine ministerial resolutions, it's agendas, it's, more of your
Pretty pricey.
basic. Well, they have limited experience, right? Because they're only doing more municipal law related to ordinances, resolutions, agendas, that sort of thing. But specialized lawsuits, personnel matters, tort claims, those get outsourced, and we end up hiring outside counsel. And even large cities end up doing that in most cases. So oftentimes small cities, because of limited revenue or being competitive in salaries, it's easier to outsource to a larger firm, someone like BB&K or others like that. There's probably some, a handful of about 10 large law firms that specialize in municipal law. And the one good thing about having a firm like that is they're a one-stop shop. So if you need a personnel attorney, if you need CEQA, you need real estate negotiation, wherever the case may be, it's a one-stop shop. You'll have a primary attorney assigned to you as the designated city attorney, but they have a whole group of attorneys.
But if that's not his expertise, he can draw on
Exactly.
his colleagues. Yeah, no, I like that.
Yeah, I personally think that Chapter has been a very successful city. There's no question of that. When we look at cities throughout the valley, throughout California, we are a sound city. And I think that a lot of that has to do with this charter. And so I don't see a need
I
to
agree.
make changes in this area. So I would just keep the current section that we currently have. That'd be my recommendation.
Cool.
You got others on Zoom, other committee members on Zoom?
Any other comments?
No, the clarification makes a lot more sense now. I think the way that we read it and understood it, or at least for myself in the beginning, was that you were overseeing him. I just don't want there to be any potential issues in the future where it can create such a big problem. So if you're telling me it's outlined like you're saying he is a contracted employee, then you give your input, but so does the council members. So it's like a 50-50 kind of situation. Then you can come to a resolution. But if you're not over them because they're not hired by the city, then that's completely separate. And I think that's appropriate.
Well, thank you. Any other comments? Moving on.
Okay. And then the last section was 7.09 and 10, which covered debt and investments respectively. And so we just wanted to get some clarification from the committee in terms of its desire to amend these sections. So section 7.09 refers to debt. In other words, whenever the city were to issue bonds and incur indebtedness. And then the other is to investments. And looking at some of the other cities' charters, some of them didn't specify, the indebtedness like ours did, or the investments. So we're just trying to get some clarification from the committee in terms, I think there was this discussion and direction that maybe we simplify those sections. So one is, is it just 7.09 and 10 to condense its language, or are we talking about the entire section 7? Because every city, if you look at the comparison that we provided, you got some cities whose charters, just a few pages to a voluminous charter. And they all basically say the same thing in the manner which we approve debt. Some of the cities require voters to approve. If the city's going to issue bonds, they require the voter to put it out to the voters, and the voters have to approve, and the supermajority 2/3 of the voters have to approve it. I can tell you that historically, the city of Shafter, aside from redevelopment bonds, the city has been adverse to issuing bonds. Bonds is like putting money on a credit card. You're borrowing money to do, usually you're doing police stations, fire stations, major infrastructure, bridges, roads, something like that.
It's a 20 or 30 year.
Exactly. It's a mortgage, right?
Yeah.
And because of the city's sound fiscal policies and being adverse to not wanting to get into debt, they've not issued general obligation bonds or revenue bonds in which the general fund is pledged. Like I said, redevelopment agency bonds we have, because under redevelopment law and the structure of redevelopment agencies is you had to incur debt in order to get the tax increment. And if you didn't have debt, then you didn't get that tax increment. It just went back out into the pool. So just about every redevelopment agency in the state was issuing bonds for funding different projects. Aside from that type of bond issuance that the city has on its books, we've not issued any general obligation bonds in which the general fund was pledged to repay back those bonds. You know, cities, you can do sewer bonds, you can do water bonds. If you're going to build a new wastewater treatment plant, you issue bonds because it's pretty significant expenditure. You need 30, 40, $50 million plus to build or expand a wastewater treatment plant.
But those enterprises.
Those are enterprises funds.
They
correct.
address those.
Exactly. And that's that's the scenarios I'm giving, general fund obligations.
Right.
But if we could do sewer bonds, right?
Right.
For a specific purpose, we could do water bonds. But those, as you said, they're enterprise funds based on the user fees that are collected. And usually the process for that, cities will do a rate study. They build the expansion of the wastewater treatment plant or water treatment plant, whatever the case may be, build it into that. And it generates sufficient money to pay that debt. That's how that's done. But so we just wanted to get some clarification in terms of these sections of what the committee is looking to or wanting to do. Is it the entire section or just the debt and investment section?
Well, after reading it over a couple of times, I kind of like the way it is.
Me too.
We have a written policy.
Mhm.
We have a history of not doing crazy things. And I think that speaks well for it. There's, if you did a general obligation bond, would you have to have a 218 election?
No, 218 pertains to user fees like water fees, wastewater treatment,
Oh, like
Fees,
the
refuse
Like
fees.
tomorrow night?
Exactly. It's ratepayers fees that you have to do.
Okay.
that. Yeah, because under Prop 218 and by law, a city can't charge more than what it costs the city to provide the service. And you have to put it out to, that's what Prop 218 does, is put it out to the property owners in that case.
Cool. Any other comments from any of the other committee members?
My concern with section 709 was not what it says, more as how it's written, specifically in section B. Because if anybody just reads this, just you guys understand debt, bonds, all of that. And I get it, this is a legal document, but if you were to read section B, it would be confusing to just anyone that's looking at this and says, what the heck are they saying here? All I was saying was, is there a way to simplify the language, not take it away, not change it, not address the way it is exactly. But if this needs to be written like this for legal purposes, then that's what it is. But if it was for the normal resident to look at it and go, what are they talking about here? How does this work? I'm trying to understand this in a council meeting in comparison to the charter. I don't understand what this means. So that's where a lot of confusion comes from people, because they're not, most residents of Shafter are not people that are well-versed in any of this stuff. So that's all I was saying. So I wanted to make sure that was very clear, that it wasn't that I was trying to change the document or what we're trying to say here. It's just the way it's written, so someone can very easily understand it without having to get additional clarification.
We can take a look at this. So this is for other indebtedness. This goes to Chair Atkinson's comment about enterprise funds. This is what, so if you read this section, it specifically says for payment of which is not a general obligation of the city. So general obligation refers to when the general fund is pledged to pay back those bonds. So this is referring to sewer bonds, water bonds. When SB1, the transportation, the gas tax, the additional gas tax passed and SB1 came into play and cities started receiving that. Some cities, in order to complete, major sections of their street improvements or major reconstruction, they issued bonds and they pledged that future gas tax, that's its revenue for it. Or again, if you're expanding a wastewater treatment plant, building a new water plant, that's what this is referring to this section. So we can take a look. In doing comparison to the other cities, some of the other cities' charters didn't specifically talk about other indebtedness. It just said indebtedness in general, and it had to go out to the voters. So ours is unique in that regard, that it calls out non-general obligation bonds or debt.
Which I think is a good thing.
So that's what this is referring to. I guess we can take a look at it and see if there's some other verbiage. But I don't know, we can possibly come up with something that's going to be more simplified than what's in here.
Well, when you start wordsmithing something that's been in existence for a long time, it usually is very difficult.
By way of example, city of Lancaster's, under public financing, theirs is a one sentence. It basically just says the city shall have the power to establish standards, procedures, rules, or regulations related to any public finance. That's it. So there's not a lot of specificity on this.
Yeah.
That's an example of
I know
how,
Rex likes it that way.
yeah. So it's whatever the desire of the committee is.
I'd like to just leave it the way it is.
Yeah, same here, actually. I think it serves its purpose. It is a legal charter, and it does give some detail that I think is important. Unlike Lancasters. Not to pick on them, but I'm just saying I like what we have.
Yeah.
You know.
And I don't believe, I haven't seen any audit that we've issued. I'm looking, any, like I said, other redevelopment, I don't think we've issued either for enterprise funds. The city, because of its financial struggles back in the 90s and whatnot, and as they became more fiscally solvent, as I said, they were adverse to getting in debt. And so the city has a history of paying cash, saving its money, and then paying for whatever projects it's undertaking. Same thing with whatever we've had to do. And we've not had to do a major project. Our water wells, we pump directly from our water wells. The water's treated at the wells before it's distributed out into the system. So we don't have a dedicated water treatment plant. Our wastewater treatment plant is part of with north of the river, and we're part owners of that. We own like 30% of that plant, and we paid cash for what it looks like in the future. That's something we'll have to discuss when they look to expand that. But it's basically for us, it's in that case is we buy what we need in terms of our capacity. So unless we're going to buy half of the future capacity, then we won't pay for that cost. We only are buying what we're going to need for that, and that's what our contribution is for it. So
Yeah, some of the influence that the city had on getting the wastewater treatment plant farther to the west made our connection from our little plant so much easier. It was just a half a mile of pipe or something. That was a win for everybody, I think. So cool. Anything else?
So just to clarify on this section, what the desires of the committee.
Well, the way I understood it, there's no change or desire to change any of the policy of how it's laid out. It's just the language so the average person could understand it if they read it themselves. Not like, but just for the majority of this town, not many will understand that section by itself the way it's written. And the way it's written is perfect policy-wise. But as far as the language-wise, it's over the head of a lot of people, is what I'm saying.
No. And this is a legal document. It's our local constitution. So it is written by attorneys, and I'm sure it's written that way because of certain requirements to do so in that regard.
So then we can't change this section essentially.
We could, that's what I'm saying. Now with the clarification, I can work with their city attorney, see if there's anything, but that's why I'm asking for clarification and direction from the committee in terms of where you as a committee are. Is it the majority that want to move in that direction, or where you're at?
I understand it. I think Chris understands it, and obviously the others do too. I was just saying, because when I think Yasmina was reading it, it was like, what in the world? Indebtedness, you know what I mean? So it's like, if someone's trying to understand this, if this is what your justification is in like a council meeting, the average person, and I'm not trying to not give them enough credit because maybe they do, but generally speaking, they're not going to go, I totally understand what they're talking about. It's not to focus on the section. It's not to focus on the specific area that it encompasses. It was just to make it simpler, but we don't probably need to put this much energy into it. If it's a legal document, I'm fine with it the way it is.
Me too. I'm fine with it the way it is.
Me too.
So.
Is that clear direction?
Okay. So section, Yasmina can go back to start slide 2. So I just want to clarify for the record of where the committee landed with any suggested change. So on this section, leave alone. All right, on section 7.09 and 10, we're leaving alone, no changes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Going back to the city attorney section, section 6.03, leave as is.
Yes.
Okay. And going back to section 5 pertaining 5.02, it's the committee's desire to again leave the language at 120 days.
Yes.
Correct.
I did have a question. So when you were saying that, obviously if they say, hey, this isn't working out, and they say to him, hey, and then they agree, right? You said that would lead to like a conversation where severance. What if they don't agree? What do you guys do there? Do they have, what is their,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, like, for example, like let's say I'm the person that they're saying that to, and I said, well, I don't want to leave. I don't have a choice, right?
So within the 100 and so this is only pertaining to those number of days immediately
Correct.
following the election.
Right.
Okay, so
Mhm.
within those 120 days, if a city manager, if the council wishes to go in a different direction and the city manager says, well, I'm not ready to go, whatever the case may be, then that's what we explain. Then one is the city council can still terminate the city manager and within those 120 days. And what the city then is most likely going to be faced in today's environment is the city manager will file suit against the city for unlawful.
Okay, that's right. I knew you said something about it, but I was trying to write notes, and that's why I said, let me come back to it. But no, that makes sense. Okay, just wanted an example.
Yeah. So
The
this,
120 days was kind of a cooling off period. If both sides want to go different directions, you have an agreement to separate.
Mhm.
Or you just keep going on until the contract is up and
city managers, we follow a standard template employment agreement, and there's severance clauses in there. If you're released without cause, so with or without cause, if it's obviously with cause, it's because you violated some city policy, did something illegal or whatever the case may be, and then there's no severance, right? If it's without cause, meaning the city council wants to go in a different direction and they want to separate from that city manager, then it's spelled out in the employment agreement that it's without cause and there's a severance clause. But the maximum by law is 18 months. That's the maximum. So it could be anywhere in between that. Know how much that severance is for a city manager. So that's what you're dealing with. But again, city managers work at the pleasure of the city council, and whenever the council wants to go in a different direction, it's going to go in that direction. And whether it's waiting out 120, 180 days, but what you typically find, and this is, I follow the profession and you see this, is when it's ready to part, they'll mutually agree and there's a separation agreement, and it can be a day after the election, or it could be a couple weeks, few weeks after that, a couple months after that. It's just when they're ready to go. You just do a separation agreement. There's nothing to preclude that from happening.
cool.
And in that case, then there's nothing, this section doesn't come into play.
Doesn't come into play at
No,
all.
because it's mutual separation and it's via separation agreement.
Any other comments? Are we done?
So just for clarification for the record, that the city we'll prepare a final report working with the city attorney's office, that the charter committee met on the however many meetings you've had. You reviewed the charter kind of discussions, and then the recommendation at this time from the committee is to not make any amendments to the city charter. I'd like to get
Correct.
that.
Correct.
Okay, you got two more.
Yeah.
Could we get the other two to
Comments by the other?
virtual thumbs up?
I don't have any comment.
I'm going to take that as an affirmative.
No.
I'm sorry, Marquez, if you can repeat what you,
Oh, I said I didn't have any comments.
okay, thank you.
So then that's what the report will say. We'll bring that report back to you as a committee. So
Thank
for
you.
you to review, and then to vote as a committee that, yes, this is our recommendation to city council. So for the record, we'll bring back that report for you to review, vote on it, and then that will get forwarded to the city council first meeting of July,
When is the
the
next meeting?
21st. When do we meet again? Yasmin?
The charter committee meets on, let me
June
pull it up, I'm
5th,
sorry, on the 20th.
or the 20th.
So if that's the one where we all agree, then we need to be present to sign.
There's not
I
a
looked
sig-
at our previous report and I didn't see a signature from the previous committee.
But if you like to do that, we can send it via DocuSign.
Yeah.
After
we
that
can send
meeting?
you a DocuSign as well.
Yeah, and
Okay.
you guys can put your signature on it. It might, might be better
It'd be
for all
nice.
committee members to, put your stamp of approval, signature of approval for the record. And
Well,
so,
that you should have it updated with the 2022 date.
yes, yes.
Cool.
And so on the meeting of the 20th, that's what we'll have. It'll be a very brief meeting for that, just for the report. We'll get that report out sooner too. We may even get that out to you by the end of this week or beginning of next week. Just so you have that. And then if you like though, instead of waiting for the 20th, if you are in agreement of that, we can, if you guys are open, we can move that up before the 20th. It's just a matter of you guys looking at the report, approving it, and then we send it to council.
I'm fine with whatever you guys.
Whatever works for everybody. I know we agreed to the dates, so I don't want to put anyone out.
No.
But I'm open and flexible.
Yeah.
But all of that, I mean, you're wanting to send it through like email for review.
We can send it to you via email as well. But we can just leave the 20th. That way we can just have a few days to draft it and send it to you. Okay, that's all we had, Chair.
All right. Need a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Second?
I second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night. We're adjourned.